Howdy, I'm Jammer. So, as you can see, I've got myself all dolled up, and most importantly, I am wearing my purple shirt. Because, what's the contrary color to purple? It's yellow. Yeah, yellow. Yellow is the color, and I'm doing that because today we're going to be talking about That Yellow Bastard by Frank Miller. It was an attempt at humor. Anyway, so when we talk about, before I forget, let's not forget the most important thing. Please, 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 please don't forget, and I'll probably mention this at the very end as well. I have started a Patreon, and that is to help me support this YouTube channel, as well as to, support the visual art that I do. You can see it on my Instagram as well as my actual website that I have for the art. There's a link tree in the description section below. It goes to my website, my Instagram, and my Patreon. Remember, I have a $1 tier. That's it. That's all I'm asking for, $1 every month. And that also reminds me, Katie, my one and only patron, thank you, thank you, thank you a million times over. You rock. Anyway, when we talk about comics, particularly Dark Horse Comics, we're talking about one of the most successful indie comic companies, and indie basically just means anybody who isn't DC or Marvel. But truly, Dark Horse has, over the course of their career, been one of the most successful indie comics companies around. Now, the future of the company, I'm not going to lie, is uncertain right now because when Disney purchased 21st Century Fox and effectively acquired Star Wars and Alien, the two major licenses that Dark Horse had access to, it has kind of left the company in a little bit of an uncertain future because Alien and most definitely Star Wars was their bread and butter and allowed them a lot of freedom in order to publish a lot more sort of smaller runs and a lot more creator-owned comics. And also, just saying, having read a bit of the new Star Wars and new Alien comics, things were a lot better under Dark Horse. Just saying. That is the hill that I'm willing to die on. If you don't like it, go somewhere else. Anyway, though, alongside, after Star Wars and Alien, probably one of the most biggest creative universes, or probably one of the most biggest talents that they had access to, was Frank Miller. And when we're talking about comics, you can't not talk about Frank Miller, and you can't not talk about Sin City. But if you look at just Frank Miller alone, you're talking about a man who has had such a significant contribution to comics. Like, you can't not have a conversation about comics and not at some point bring up The Dark Knight Returns. This book came out in the 1980s, and it created a huge sensation when it was released because it was doing things that nobody had really seen done in a comic, particularly a Batman comic before. And on the note of Batman comics and Frank Miller, you can't not talk about Batman Year One. This book was really influential, especially for Christopher Nolan when he was doing The Dark Knight and, The Dark Knight Rises and all that jazz. Batman Year One is still considered by a great number of people a canonical text in terms of the whole Batman lore. But it doesn't even necessarily have to be just DC books. If you look at the Sin City run, and yes, I'm going to be showing off all the Frank Miller books that I have access to because I like Frank Miller books. But when we're talking about Sin City, especially with The Hard Goodbye, which was the first and major story arc in the actual Sin City movie, characters like Marv were really influential upon the next generation because Frank Miller established a creative universe that was, one, very familiar to a great number of readers who had been reading comics for decades because it was very pulpy, crime noir. It was hot girls and dangerous guys, and there was guns and conspiracies and violence galore. Sin City was a huge creative landscape that, one, resonated with a great number of readers, and two, was just really great for comics, period. And then, of course, you can't talk about comics without 300. So, this little sort of list of books is not just me showing off, going like, haha, I own a copy of 300. But also, I own a copy of 300, and it's really great, and I want to talk about it on this channel, hopefully sometime in the future, so stay tuned for that. But today's video is about That Yellow Bastard, and I really wanted to start the Sin City arc with this book, because, one, it's probably, to me, one of the most visually interesting of the Sin City books. And also, too, realistically speaking, as you can kind of see, I own a great number of Sin City books, but I managed to get a copy of That Yellow Bastard, which is in one of the sort of larger sizes, so it's a little more conducive for using it here on the channel. Hope you understand, but also That Yellow Bastard is great. Also, though, trigger warning for anybody at home: there are representations of violence. There's a lot of nudity and sex in this book, and there is reference to pedophile and rape. Now, fortunately for us, I'm not going to show you any of the sex, so hopefully I don't have to do a parental, advisory on it unless YouTube flags me. But then also, too, just letting anybody know, if you approach this book and you've never read Sin City book, this is going to be violent, and there's going to be lots of corruption, so get ready for it. Now, for those of you who are longtime fans of Sin City, let's talk a little bit about That Yellow Bastard, what it's about, and then just why, formally, this book is such a great comic and what it contributes to the medium of comics. Okay, so I've talked a little bit now about Frank Miller. If you want more details about his life, honestly, just go to the Wikipedia page and read a bit more about him, and that'll take you to a bunch of great articles and videos about Frank Miller. His long-term contributions to comic, what I would argue is probably his recent descent into insanity, or at least us recognizing that he was just always crazy, and now we're just really able to identify it as such. But whatever the case, Frank Miller's a really interesting dude, and he's done so much for comics. Definitely check him out, because he's worth your time. Case in point, I'm going to dedicate all this time talking about one of his best books ever. So, when we talk about That Yellow Bastard, again, it is a Sin City book. And Sin City really began to appear, I believe, about 1990s. And when Sin City made its appearance on the scene, it created a splash. Not just because it was a great, fun, pulpy book filled with true crime and sort of quasi-superheroes that were also, honestly speaking, mostly just anti-heroes, and it dealt with depictions of, violence and political corruption, and there was cannibalism, and then there was also, a secret society of hookers who ran basically their own part of the city. It was just nuts and crazy, and there was also lots of naked women in the book, too, so let's be real here and understand part of the appeal for it. But underneath all of the pulp and true crime of the Sin City universe, what always sold copies was Frank Miller. And when I say that, it's important because when you talk about comics as a visual medium, or even just as a medium itself, there really isn't anybody who gets that as well as Frank Miller. Now, for the most part, most Sin City books are going to be predominantly just black and white. It's a book and a series which really tries to explore kind of sort of the relativity of human morality, and as a way of sort of also throwing in with the sort of true crime noir aspects of it. Frank Miller tends to leave it predominantly just as a black and white landscape. This book is probably one of the few exceptions that I'm really aware of where he actually brings in color to the book, but I'll talk about that at a later date. But if I can go back just to the opening page, if you look at just this 2-page spread, it doesn't take too long for the reader to observe that he's doing something that most comics creators don't. And I mean that as somebody who reads a lot of comics. Most people just set up the panel, put the characters in, and do a couple of word bubbles. That's it. It's not necessarily that I would consider that laziness, it's just that's what most people consider what they need to do with comics. But again, one of the interesting things about comics as a medium is it's not just creating interesting visual images or telling interesting stories about, costume superheroes. Again, the way you arrange the panels on the page, the way you arrange the human figures, or if you're not telling a book about human beings, just the way you arrange the figures in relation to the space of the pages, and the way you use wording, lettering, what have you, all contribute to a sensation. If you look at this, just page 1 is literally just a huge Chapter 1. It's almost a kind of monolithic presence unto itself, and the figures who are our main story are relatively small in relation to it. I mean, honestly, if you just pull back and look at the figure of Hartigan and his partner, they barely constitute any space on the page itself. And the size of this page, it's not necessarily 8.5 by 11, but it's kind of close to that. So picture a basic sheet of printer paper. If you look at these two pages, again, it's a small presence. And then you have his actual internal monologue. This is a structure that Frank Miller uses in a lot of the Sin City universe. Most characters are thinking out loud to themselves, which, again, structurally, I'm not really that big a fan of, unless it's Frank Miller, because this is usually where he just goes with his dialogue, and his characters feel so real. So, looking at this two-page spread alone, I really hope I can convey to you what he's doing with just the simple black and white, the lettering, the arrangements of the figures. This is a gorgeous page. And this is page 1 of a book that's close to like 200, yeah, somewhere around like 250 pages. Page 1 of 250 pages is already a beautiful composition, and it only gets better from there. The story focuses around a detective by the name of Hartigan. He's an old cop. He's about to retire. It's literally his last day on the force, which right off the bat is so pulpy. It sounds like a bad action film. But Hartigan is trying to race because, at the moment, a young man by the name of Rourke, who's the son of a Senator Rourke, is about to rape a young, I believe she's supposed to be about 8 or 9-year-old girl. He's actually done this multiple times. Hartigan can't prove that it's him, but this is his opportunity to stop him before yet another victim falls prey to Rourke. And he charges in order to, save a young woman by the name of Nancy Callahan. Now we get this nice little shot here of Rourke coming in and talking to her, and we feel already a dramatic sense of tension. And you'll note right here, Hartigan says, no. He won't let this happen. He's having a heart attack because he has a heart condition, and from that solid black page, we then get him waking back up and literally crawling to save Nancy. Now, again, anybody could have set such a story up. What's really great about Frank Miller is the way he plays with the arrangements of the panels, with the way he arranges word balloons and dialogue boxes. You can see the way he sets up the figure, the perspective of Hartigan in this shot. His hand is really close to us, so we can kind of feel the energy of him reaching forward to drag himself closer to the viewer. Again, it's little tricks like this that run throughout the book that make That Yellow Bastard such a really great and interesting read. Because again, you could set this character up having a heart attack and use body language to do it. But it's, again, by arranging the figures within the space and arranging the panels and layouts, you get such a really interesting energy to this. You can feel the tension. You can feel Hartigan just crawling forward to save Nancy. It, rhetorically speaking, and here I have to be very careful because everybody's going to be like, oh God, English major, here we go. Rhetorically speaking, it's a way of communicating that energy. And then again, if we look at just some of the aspects of it, again, Sin City is a pretty violent book. There's lots of shooting, there's stabbing, there's fist fights, and so oftentimes we are able to see Frank Miller is really good at using body language to convey energy. He's really good about using careful lettering to create sounds and sensations. And one of the other things that's like key to like the success, I would argue, of Frank Miller as an artist is he knows how to use splotches. Now, if you read any Sin City book, you're going to get drenched with blood. White, thick blood. Okay, kind of, but not really. You'll see here in this moment, Hartigan is shooting off the young Rourke's ear. I honestly can't remember the name of Senator Rourke's son. If somebody remembers it, just post it in the comment section below, and I will be immensely appreciative. But you can see here, again, by stripping it down to just black and white and using that splatter effect, you get the physical sensation of this kid having his ear blown completely off. It's crazy. And I love it. Now, moving forward, Hartigan is eventually shot by his partner. He's kind of double-crossed, but Nancy gets away. When he wakes up, he's been shot several times. Well, his partner shoots him several times. He kind of blacks out. We think that he's dead. When he wakes up, we observe that Senator Rourke is at his end of his bed, and Senator Rourke does this long monologue about the differences between good and evil and what power actually is. He threatens Hartigan's life, and he's like, nope, I'm going to ruin your life because you ruined my son's life. I'm going to tell everybody that you raped Nancy, and you're going to go to jail for the rest of your life, and if you tell anybody what's happening, I'll kill you, and more importantly, I'll kill Nancy and your wife. Again, Frank Miller is often making these kind of quasi-morality, no, not quasi, these sometimes heavy-handed morality tales, and this book is definitely about exploring the notion of corruption and abuse of power and authority, because Hartigan is a good cop in a town where that just doesn't exist. But looking at this passage here again, what's beautiful to me is that a long monologue by a super creepy, gross senator like this could have just been an empty presentation. But if you look at this two-page spread, he uses 6 panels. Well, honestly, looking at it, really more close to about 9 panels. But again, Rourke's monologue doesn't feel static. Frank Miller knows how to move him around the pages. He knows how to use black and white to really bring out the grotesque quality of Senator Rourke. Looking at the wrinkles in his face, the way his nose has become kind of bulbous, the way his eyes are sort of distinct, kind of Marilyn Manson-esque, and the way his mouth appears a kind of like open, sort of ravenous jaw. He's a repulsive figure. And again, it's by using the body language, it's by using these page layouts that this monologue really manages to have the energy that it does. Now, from this point, there's several passages of Hartigan being interrogated by other cops. We see him just kind of sinking lower and lower spiritually until he's thrown in prison. Now, how are you going to do bars and a prison cell using just black and white? Like I said, Miller is a goddamn madman, but damn, he's so good at visually creating spaces using just the simplest strokes of white and black. We have here, if not just a really interesting design, we probably have a wonderful visual metaphor for where Hartigan winds up through this whole affair. Now, the reader, after Hartigan gets beat up and get out of the hospital, and we see his wife try to talk him out of it, and all this jazz, Hartigan winds up in a prison cell, and we're told that he stays in that prison cell for about 8 years. And during that 8-year period, Nancy is writing him letters, which is really sweet and really beautiful. And we can observe how they become something really vital and important to Hartigan, again, by reading these dialogue balloons, but then also just kind of looking at how his isolation sort of really enhances how important Nancy is to Hartigan. Now, I said a minute ago, or a while ago, that color is going to be really important because, again, when we look at this, Hartigan is sort of like slowly spiraling out once Nancy's letters sort of seemingly stop. And again, up to this point, it's been black and white, black and white, black and white. You turn the page, and you get these 2 stunning images. And one of the reasons why That Yellow Bastard is, well, titled That Yellow Bastard, we have a giant yellow bastard. That's it. What we find out is this is Senator Rourke's son. He's gone through a number of experimental medical procedures in order to grow back his genitals after Hartigan shot them off, and it has resulted in him basically becoming very large, bulbous, grotesque. Basically, picture him as a giant pimple. I mean, that's probably one of the best ways to put it. He's just gross. And probably one of the best lines ever to introduce a character is, let's see, where is it? Yeah, right here. This guy smells awful. You can really almost smell him. I mean, you just listening to Hartigan describe him as such, you can kind of physically feel his smell. You're already physically repulsed by him, and I just realized my AC is on, so there's probably going to be some background humming, so I'll probably stop here for a sec. But before I do, just pay attention to the fact that when we're looking at this, this is a huge explosion upon the reader, because up to this point, again, we've never seen color in this world. It's just black and white. And now I'm going to pause it for a second so we can continue, because I forgot to turn off my AC. So I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. Yeah, I changed the comic. You think I'm not going to change the comic just because I had to pause because of my own snafu? Ballyhoo? Words? Anyway, I changed the comic. Deal with it. Great book, by the way. Mr. Miracle by Tom King, Appearance of Apocalypse, and here is beautiful, and the story is solid. I really want to talk about this book one day, and if you like it and you want me to see it, please let me know in the comment section below, and I will get off my butt and actually sit down and read it again, because holy crap, this book is good. But I'm here to talk about Sin City. So if we move forward a little bit, after the scene where basically Senator O'Rourke's son appears, he punches Hartigan, and then we find a thumb of what appears to be a little girl. And Hartigan assumes that this is Nancy. They found him, and so he basically confesses to raping Nancy, even though he didn't. And of course, we get this really, really beautiful shot. I wasn't going to show it originally, but I've got to show it here. It's so gorgeous. Again, Miller is nuts, but he's great. Now, there's another scene where once Hartigan is out, he goes looking for Nancy, and he finds her, and he discovers that she's a stripper. Now, I can't show you the actual scene of the discovery because it involves nudity. I mean, again, it's exposed female breasts, and, man shows his bare top. That's fine, whatever. A woman shows her top. Whoa. That sounds like porn. We can't show it on YouTube. So, bad. Anyway, what's important about the discovery is it also, again, we observe that it's a trap, that it was really just a play by the Rourkes in order to sort of suss out Nancy and get it. Now, this two-page spread really isn't all that interesting in and of itself. Well, no. Just about every page of this book is gorgeous and worth your time. But one of the things I like about it, again, is that you see how Frank Miller is really playing with color and lack of color throughout this book. Since most of the time he's usually just playing with black and white, Junior's character just bursts forth out of all this black, out of all this white again, and it really heightens the kind of tension because you see how close these characters are. Now, another thing here too is if you take the time and effort to read this right here, you observe the character of Shelley and Dwight. Their reference to another Sin City story called The Big Fat Kill. Now, normally, whenever I hear anything like, oh, this is a reference to this other part of the cinematic, or this other part of the universe, I start to just kind of roll my eyes because I'm so tired of every story basically being a setup for another story. Like, seriously, I'm sick of it. I'm tired of it. Why can't I just get one story? I'm willing to forgive Sin City in this instance because, again, it never appears heavy-handed. Every single little bit of the story doesn't feel like Frank Miller just trying to seed some stories out so that he can have more material. It's really about creating the atmosphere of Sin City, and also in that particular scene to just show how apathetic people are, or basically how unaware everybody is to the exchange between Junior and Hartigan. Now, another little reference here, too. When Hartigan eventually discovers, or when Hartigan is eventually caught by Junior, and Junior takes Nancy away and tries to kill Hartigan, Hartigan makes his way to the farm, the Rourke farm, which, again, is another reference to The Big Fat Kill. One of the interesting things about Sin City is it does create a real sense of place and space and universe and time, and I just wanted to point out that anybody who's ever read The Big Fat Kill, you should know who Kevin is. Kevin is a creep. But there's one last page I really wanted to focus on, and that is when Hartigan is running to save Nancy, which, spoiler alert, he does. And he kills Junior in a spectacular fashion. I don't think I've ever stood up and slow clapped while reading a comic. I did while reading this one. But when Hartigan is rushing to save Nancy on the farm, he begins to suffer a heart attack. And it's important to note that, again, Frank Miller really knows how to create a scene and a place using just black and white and using the arrangement of figures within the frames and the panels to convey information and to really just leave the reader breathless. I can't describe to you how important or even just how stunned and amazed I was by these pages. And when you really consider of it, it's Hartigan walking up to a barn. Like, seriously, that's it. Those pages that I just took time and the effort to show you, it's literally just a figure walking up to a barn. But again, if you take the time to really look at it, you begin to really study it and see that, again, you're talking about just a few lines on the page, a little bit of black right here, and then just a small splashes of black here, and he's able to convey Hartigan walking through the snow up to a barn. It's beautiful. It's minimalist per se, but it's really more just a careful execution of color, or really in this case, lack thereof, to just convey information to the reader. And I am not aware of any other artist, cartoonist, or sometimes even visual artist who's really accomplished enough to pull something like that off. So for me, Sin City, That Yellow Bastard is such a vital comic to read if you want to see what's possible through the medium of comics, because there's a lot of choices in this book that Frank Miller makes that are really good examples of what you can do with visual information, with arrangements of panels on the page, what you can do with story and narrative and perspective. God, I could talk about this book for hours, but I won't, because you need to go and read it yourself. It's great. So, yeah. I love this book. Let's do the last hurrah and then call it a day. Whew. Okay. So, Sin City, That Yellow Bastard by Frank Miller. It's just wonderful. Like just about every Sin City book. And I do want to sit down and read more Sin City books and talk about them here because they're so important when you're talking about comics as a medium. But this book, especially for me, is a really great example of, one, why Frank Miller is crazy, but also a vital cartoonist in terms of understanding the medium of comics. And then also, too, he's wonderful for the way he brings a tremendous sense of possibility and energy to just about every book he touches. Not every book that he's ever done is gold or perfect, but what can't be denied, especially with this book, is that Frank Miller understands how comics works, and he understands that it can work best when you don't feel the limitation arranged by panels. Instead, by sort of playing with the medium, by rearranging panels, by rearranging perspective, and even sometimes just limiting the language down to just a few strokes of lines or dashes of color on a page, you can create an amazing story. And then on top of all of that, Sin City is just a fun read, and I would recommend it to just about anybody who, one, is interested in true crime fiction, or just two, wants to approach comics from a visual perspective and try something unique and different. That Yellow Bastard is great. If you haven't read it before, please, 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 if nothing else, give it a shot, because if, this video hasn't been evidence enough, it's worth your time. All right, I'm going to call it a day there. Thank you so much for watching. I tremendously appreciate it. As always, please like, share, and subscribe, all that claptrap. It lets me know that you're watching these, that you like watching these, or that you're at least moderately entertained by me, or maybe you just like laughing at me. Hey, no judgment, whatever you're into. When it comes to Sin City and That Yellow Bastard specifically, these, I believe, appeared originally in installments. I don't know how accessible many of them are, because especially when you're talking about Sin City, this is a really popular series and has a pretty ravenous fan base, and I don't know how often Dark Horse has been reprinting them lately. But check out your local comic book shop. Ask them about Sin City. They may not have an edition that looks like this, or even an edition that looks like this, but I guarantee you they'll probably be able to hook you up with a solid Sin City book. And then also, too, don't forget that you live in a world with public libraries. So check out your local public library. Ask them if they've got a copy of Sin City, any of the Sin City books. They may have that huge compendium, big damn Sin City. I know my library has it, and Lord, shelving that thing is just killing my spine. But they may have it. And if they don't, ask for an interlibrary loan form, and they'll be happy to set you up. And then, as always, like I said at the start, I've got a Patreon. It's in my link tree below. It's literally $1 a month. So if you've got a few pennies in your pocket and you like this channel and you want to keep supporting me and you want to make sure that I've got enough money for comic books and paints and markers, I would be immensely appreciative, and I'll give you a shout out on the video. Hey, why not? So, thank you again for watching. I tremendously appreciate it. Go read some comics.